Sakamoto Days still has a character problem. 6 months ago, I made a video detailing why I think this is the case. Essentially, it boils down to Suzuki having characters added into the story merely just to get a certain thing done or move the story forward in a very specific way, making them plot devices and major examples of wasted potential. I use the examples of Lu, Kaiji, Torimaru, and most of Suzuki's gang since they're all sort of just shoehorned into the story and either quickly get phased out or lose or die, making them seem like an overall waste. And I'm happy to report that 6 months later, the story has the same issue, if not even worse. So let's talk about it. So what has actually happened in the 6 months since I posted that video? Well, we had a flashback for Shin, Izuki launched a revolution, Shishiba, Osaragi, and Kamiyate revolted against the order, Atari used the tunnel effect, Sakamoto got put into a coma, Nagumo and Oki started fighting, and Suzuki introduces like 5 new villains all at once into the story and immediately throws them in for fights. Notice how, in my quick summary of events, we only ever hear about the characters that we've already had significant screen time for, with the exceptions of Atari and Oki. Despite the already immense size of the cast within Sakamoto Days, Suzuki seems to be unable to find a time for other characters to be able to play a major role in the story, and continues to add random characters with zero depth. For instance, Kendaka woke up over a year ago and has done just about nothing. The fastest assassin alive, someone who is capable of seeing bullets move in slow motion like it's nothing, was reintroduced into the story over a year ago, and its only contributions have been telling Shin and Heisuke to go to prison and grabbing Sakamoto's lifeless body. You would think that someone this strong would have a bigger role to play or maybe receive more screen time, but nah, he's just there. At this point, I'm not even sure it was necessary to bring him back if we weren't gonna see him outside of group discussions. Yotsumura falls into a similar category too. Now, he doesn't have zero depth, but he was saved by Nagumo like 2.5 years ago and since then has shown up in the story a whopping 2 times. He showed up once to tell Nagumo about someone using Rion's JAA ID and another to pull up on Oki. Now, Yotsumura is a goat, but the fact that he literally had Oki at knife point and still somehow allowed Oki to pull out his big-ass guando is insane. And since then, he has done nothing. I don't even think he's in the escort van with the rest of the crew. Atari is a slightly different case. The wait time between her introduction and her big act of relevance wasn't nearly as big as Kendaka or Yotsumura's, but her function in the story, I'd argue, makes her even more shallow than the other two. With Kendaka and Yotsumura, they at least have the interesting lore as founders of the order. With Atari, she's just randomly mentioned to be the JA's fortune teller, is given zero backstory or depth, and does her last useful thing in the story by saving Shin, before becoming self-admittedly useless. In fact, her role in the story was always to be a Shin plot device. The only reason Shin wanted to see her in the first place was to level up his mind-reading powers, and while she's not directly the reason he got stronger, she did save him against Tenkyu, and then did it again against Takazuki before running out of luck. As far as readers know, she has basically zero reason to be in the story anymore because her powers are gone, so she's just a regular person. And this formula of introducing a character and then making them useless has been kicked into a higher gear as of the most recent arc. Currently, Sakamoto Days is in what seems to be its final arc. Suzuki has come out and said that the series is entering its final fight, which means the story probably has like 40 chapters left. Unfortunately, Suzuki has killed off so many villains and introduced so many people for the protagonists that the sides are wildly unbalanced. It would be a straight up stomp if the two sides were to fight right now. So what's the solution? Introduce 5 random characters for the villains so the two sides have a more even number of fighters. Now, you don't have to be a literary genius to see why this is a poor writing decision. For one, since the series is ending soon, there is no possible way we get a satisfying conclusion to the overarching narrative while fitting in all the fights, resolving all of the side plots, and giving these 5 new villains depth. As of right now, we literally only know one of their names. Moreover, given Suzuki's history of making the villains of the story completely useless, I find it hard to believe that these new villains will be that big of a threat in the grand scheme of the story. As of me writing, we currently have Heisuke 1v2ing Kumanomi and the wrestler guy, and Lu fighting the cop guy. Now, in the fanbook, Heisuke has a 2 in physical ability and a 1 in martial arts. He should have been turned to paste the moment he left the van. But instead, he's somehow holding off both Kumanomi and the wrestler guy at the same time. Mind you, the wrestler guy was specifically scouted because he was recognized as a killing prodigy. And now we have Lu, who hasn't seen the light of relevance since the Death Row inmate arc. Now, it is good that Suzuki is finally using characters he's already had in the story to do something, instead of coming up with a completely new character for the plot. The problem is twofold though. For one, this is one of the last fights in the series. And for two, regardless of the outcome of this fight, it will be bad for the story. If Lu wins, that makes the cop guy look like a complete bum since we don't even know how Lu has been training since she was last in the story. Her last showing of strength wasn't even enough to shut down Saw, and Saw is straight fodder. So unless she had a magically contrived power-up while just being at the store, she should be insanely weak. But if Lu loses, then she will once again fall victim to the formula of introducing a character only to have them taken out of the story. I can see a few things happening from here. Either Lu beats this guy by herself, which would be bad, Lu loses, which would be bad, Lu gets help, which helps offset her being useless but still has the cop guy fall to the wasted potential formula, or they tie, which would be kind of unsatisfying. Realistically, Suzuki has written himself into a corner not just with the cop guy and Lu, but with all of the new villains he's introduced. With Heisuke, there is no possible way he clutches a 1v2 against Kumanomi and the wrestler guy. Realistically, if Kumanomi fought him like she fought Hyo, Heisuke would be sidewalk pain in like 2 pages. But because Suzuki is so hesitant to give the villains a win, and because Heisuke is so generally loved by the community, I don't really see him dying here. Regardless of whether he logs in by himself or gets help, I think it's the end of the line for both Kumanomi and the wrestler guy, which would suck because this is literally his first fight. Unfortunately, I see this happening to all 5 of the new villains introduced. It's simply too late in the story for them to not lose their fights. It might not happen within their first opponents, but they're losing sooner or later, and they're doing so as characters written in merely so the protagonists wouldn't instantly beat the antagonists. Moreover, Suzuki wrote himself into this position through a combination of overinflating the cast and not giving the series any stakes. Suzuki chose to reintroduce so many characters for the protagonists while simultaneously taking out too many villains too quickly, resulting in a mad rush to create a bunch of nameless NPCs for the protagonists to fight in the final arc of the story, with the side effect being that the readers are completely devoid of any attachment to these characters and are literally only reading to see the protagonists have one last chance to aura farm. So all in all, what am I trying to say? I'm saying that Sakamoto Days' character problem of constantly introducing characters, particularly on the villain side, and then having them lose and be removed from the story, has persisted and even reached its worst state by this point in the story. Suzuki has forced himself to write these villains in, and these villains are destined to be one-dimensional plot devices because of Suzuki's own poor writing decisions for a large portion of the manga. Unfortunately, the only way I can see these villains not being complete pushovers in their first fights would be to kill Lu and Heisuke, and while I personally support this idea, I know most fans won't, and it's more than likely not happening, so we're left with a really disappointing set of characters and a problem that has persisted to the end of the manga.